Moving on now, our next topic is Gas Matters, Navigating Standards, Compliance and Future Trends, presented by Paul Beaumont. Now, he's the Principal Inspector, Petroleum and Gas at Resources Safety and Health Queensland. Now, Paul's been involved in the gas industry since 1980, and he did his apprenticeship with British Gas. Paul joined the Inspectorate in 2010 and now represents RSHQ on multiple Australian standards committees for gas fitting work, gas appliance design and emerging hydrogen technologies. So let's make him feel very welcome here today. Put your hands together for Paul.
Presentations that I've done before know that I'm going to be challenged to meet the time frame, so we won't worry about the flags going up for 10 and 5 minutes. So first of all, I'd just like to thank Master Plumbers Queensland for the opportunity to present here today. Already had the introduction as to who I am and what I do. I'm going to give you a brief overview of RSHQ and my role within RSHQ, and then we're just going to go on to some general gas safety and compliance issues. So first of all, Resources Safety and Health Queensland. So it's a statutory body that was established in 2020 through legislation that was introduced through Parliament. Those of us who are slightly older in the audience will remember that we were Department of Mines and Energy. We've been Department of Natural Resources and Mines and Energy. We've been many names in the past, but we're now a statutory body which is self-funded through the industry. And we regulate the whole of the gas industry, right the way from exploration and production through pipelines that transmit the pipe gas from one place to another sometimes, and sometimes they break in the middle. And then we go right down to the barbecues in people's homes. My role within that is that I'm the Principal Inspector for Gas Work and Devices, so I cover really anything that is used to combust gas or use gas now. We used to say combust gas, but now with hydrogen, we don't combust it every time, we use it through fuel cells. And to do that, we have a framework that's quite prescriptive. We require people to be licensed, so trade and occupational licensing. So within the inspectorate, we've got a licensing unit, which issues the licenses. We require gas devices to be approved. So we've got a number of gas device approval authority holders that approve gas devices to certain standards. And then we have safety requirements, which is the standards or codes of practice that gas installers have to work to. So talking about safety requirements, basically when it comes to my area, we're talking about standards, and majority of the time until recent times we've been talking about Australian standards. We are now starting to move to adopt overseas standards, ISO standards, etc. But the main standards within my portfolio are 5601, both Part 1 and 2, 4575, which was recently introduced into legislation, which is all about servicing Type A gas appliances, 1596 for the storage and handling of LPG, and AS314 for anybody in the audience who does Type B devices. We've just recently, in the last year or so, we're just coming up to a year anniversary, we've had a new version of 5601 published by Standards Australia. It was published in September 2022. In Queensland, we have a 6-month transition period. Now, it's not well understood, I don't think, but what happens is once the standard is published, it's actually the law in Queensland on the day it's published. So this was published on the 30th September 2022. So legally, that is then the standard that should be applied from that date forward. But what we have in Queensland is a 6-month transition. So for 6 months after the date of publication, the old standard still has value and can still be applied. But that transition period is supposed to allow any projects that are commenced or being designed to transition to the new standard where any requirements have changed. A little bit of history. The first Australian standard, the real Australian standard, was the 2004 edition. Prior to that, it was an AGA code and a combined standard. So we've had the 2004, 2010, 2013, and now for 561 Part 1, we're on the 2022. In the 22 edition, there's been some significant changes, especially around emergency isolation. And some of that was born out of multi-layer pipe, PEX pipe, and some of it was born out of high-risk locations such as commercial kitchens and educational facilities. So the other big change is actually a defined way by which commercial catering equipment or domestic catering equipment that is connected via a hose assembly should be connected, with very prescriptive ways about the way the hose should hang, the distance of connections and things like that. First of all, I'll just cover off on the schools and commercial kitchens, because since the introduction, as I say, it was 30th of March last year, 2023, when we stopped using the 2013 standard. I've received quite a number of inquiries or I've had quite a number of conversations about how these particular things apply. So for educational installations, basically for Queensland, we're quite lucky. This came as a bit of a shock to the rest of Australia, but in Queensland, we actually had this built into our Education Queensland building requirements for training centres, for schools, etc. And basically it talks about having a safety shut-off system that has a really accessible ESD, and it has a pressure proving system, so that where there's no flame failure, like Bunsen burners, those little pesky little kids can't turn the taps on and leave them running with gas escaping into the room. The other one that was introduced is a bit new for us, but it's commercial kitchens, and we have had a significant number of incidents in commercial kitchens where hoses have split or gas appliances have been left on, because commercial kitchens don't require flame supervision on all burners. The main thing to remember is the key reset. This seems to be the point that confuses some people. So the key reset is all about if the power fails. So if you imagine the power fails in a building, obviously if it's on a solenoid valve, the solenoid valve will shut. What you don't want is when the power comes back on, is that solenoid to open with nobody knowing that it's going to open. So that's the point of the key reset, is it's a manual intervention by the chef or a member of staff that actually switches a key to actually re-energise the valve. So that's all done in some of the control panels you can purchase through different suppliers, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a key in the ESD itself. It can be on the panel, but it just needs to mean that when the power comes back on, the solenoid doesn't reactivate, it waits for someone to interact with it. And that's not interaction of resetting the ESD, it's interaction of putting a key in a slot and turning it. I am realistic, I do realise that a lot of chefs will leave the key in the key, but the standard says that that's what should be done. Probably the most controversial change, and the one that's caused most consternation with installers, has been some changes around multi-layer pipe. Now the first part of that is that we now require a safety shut-off system, an emergency safety shut-off system, where multi-layer pipe is used as part of the installation. And it can be of two types, but only in certain circumstances. So the preferred option and the mandatory option in, let's say, all buildings, is that it is a safety shut-off system that includes a solenoid valve and some form of sensing through smoke detection or fire safety system, that should someone be warned within the building that there is a fire or there is a reason to evacuate, the gas is shut off. All right? So that's for any high-rise, commercial kitchens, blocks of units, any of those buildings. There is an option, and it is supposed to be an option, not the way it's supposed to be done in a Class 1 building, but there is an option, if it's a Class 1A building, that you can use what they call an excess flow valve. And basically an excess flow valve is exactly what it says. If the flow goes over a certain rate, it automatically shuts off, and so that stops the gas flowing. So there are some critical points with this. The safety shut-off system with the solenoid valve and the detector, that's quite well known. It's an understood practice. The excess flow valves are a new thing for us in Australia. They have been around for 20 to 25 years in Europe, but they are new for us. They are confusing to size when you first start doing it. We have identified as inspectors, when we go around, that there is quite a high level of lack of understanding of how to size these excess flow valves. I'm not going to go through it today, but if you have an association like Master Plumbers or someone like that that will provide some training on this, and you're going to use those in Class 1A buildings, it's a good idea to understand and learn how to size them correctly. There is a knock-on effect from this, a potential knock-on effect from this. At the moment, these excess flow valves are only required in new builds because as of the standard last year, so it's not retrospective for existing installations. However, there are some conversations between home insurers that have said that they may require that to lower premiums on houses with existing gas systems, because the whole point of these valves is that if there is a fire, they shut the gas off, which stops fueling the fire and allows emergency services more time to respond. That was the initial impact of why they were introduced. So as I say, in a Class 1A building, you can use the excess flow valve rather than a full system, which obviously is more cost effective than the full system, but there is some complexities around sizing them and the position of where you install them. So I will be hanging around afterwards. If anybody wants to talk about that more, we can talk about that kind of offline, but I would encourage you to undertake any training or familiarisation you can see with your associations or with the manufacturers of the valves. The other thing that was introduced was a number of restrictions on multi-layer pipe. Now, this has been introduced because it has been seen that when multi-layer pipe was first introduced into Australia, there were a number of things within the European standard, where it came from, that weren't included in its first introduction. So, for instance, and building practices are different in Europe, but they're basically brick homes, twin brick wall homes, and originally multi-layer pipe wasn't allowed to be exposed. It had to be within the fabric of the building, not exposed to UV or exposed to mechanical damage. So now in our standard, in 5601, we now have some requirements that it's not permitted external to the building. That doesn't just mean outside of the building, exposed in the garden or the sunlight. It means exposed from the building fabric. So when you enter a wall, so if you come off of LPG cylinders off the gas meter, you need a metre of copper pipe before you go to PEX inside the wall. And before you exit the wall to go to an appliance, you need another metre of copper pipe. So all of the PEX pipe should be contained within the building fabric itself. Part of that is UV protection, mechanical structure, mechanical strength of the pipe, and it's also about that metre of copper is about heat transfer if someone tries to braze onto the end of the pipe, not knowing what is within the wall. Yep. 561 Part 2. So we had Part 2 introduced in 2020, 2 years earlier. I'm not going to go through Part 2 in detail today, but some of the questions that I get are around ignition sources. And how do they get defined? Obviously, when you're talking about Part 2, we're relating to caravans and boats, and space for the installation is a lot more confined than it is in a domestic home or in a commercial kitchen. And so being able to locate cylinders and pipework away from sources of ignition, especially batteries or generators mounted on drawbars and things, becomes more difficult because of the lack of space. There's also an element that the caravan itself may have some safety equipment like breakaway systems or anti-lock brakes, which need to be on the drawbar, but because they need to be there, they're within the hazardous zone. So 5601 Part 2 is the only standard you need if it is a domestic caravan. You don't need to go to 1596, and it defines an ignition source differently to some of the other gas standards. It talks about things that are non-sparking by nature or encapsulated, but not necessarily EX rated. So if you're working in a commercial kitchen or a hydrogen facility, you'd be looking at EX rated equipment, potentially. But with a caravan, there's a cost attached to EX rating, so they just use the terms encapsulated and non-sparking by nature. That allows for that emergency equipment, as I say, the breakaways, and electronic braking systems to be within that zone. And obviously there's risk mitigation because those components aren't used normally when the gas system is being used. The other two questions I get quite a lot is why, and it's not so much a question with the main run, but we do get a lot of people running the main run within the vehicle, within the caravan, or especially with motorhomes. But the requirement is that the main run should be outside of the vehicle, or must be outside the vehicle. And the reasons for that is any potential leak points will be inside the vehicle, then the gas can accumulate. And obviously, if it's under a bed or in linning or something like that, it can collect to a dangerous level. So it has to be outside the caravan or outside the structure, and the pipework from the main run to an appliance needs to be as short as practicable. The other thing is, I get a lot of questions, and this is becoming more of a problem now because of tiny homes, which are in themselves becoming a conversational point. But why can't we use multi-layer piping, or why can't we use a press fit type style fitting? They are prohibited within the standard, but the reason they are prohibited is because press fit fittings and multi-layer pipe aren't subjected to any vibration testing when they're certified. And also, press fit fittings do move, but they just move by nature. They're not a rigid connection as is brazing, so they are prohibited. So the reasons they're not allowed at the moment is because of that testing, not suitable for the application. The problem we've got is traditional caravans are one thing, things like tiny homes or portable homes are another thing. So just be aware if you undertake that work that it's not part one. If it's anything that can be transported, whether it's got its own wheels or it goes on a flatbed, it's part two for the piping system, not part one. Other safety requirements. So at the beginning I gave you a quick list, so I'd just like to talk about the others, because I think when we're licensed people and we're gas fitters, we know that 5601 is the standard we work to. What you might not be aware of is we've also got 4575, which is a servicing standard. So servicing gas appliances is also gas work, which requires a licence. Historically, we haven't actually had a standard by which people can be confident they're doing the right thing. So it was 4 years ago, 4575 was reworked from a quality standard really related to documentation and how you should present your reports to the owner of the device, more to how you actually conduct servicing. So in the absence of any instructions on servicing from the manufacturer, you should refer to 4575 for those extra requirements around it. Now, I think if you're used to servicing gas appliances, nothing will jump out of that standard at you as a surprise, but there is some informative stuff in there about how you would test for electrical safety. Just remember, the standard talks about it, but your gas licence doesn't allow you to do that work unless you've got a restricted electrical licence. Then we've got 1596, which is a bit of a crossover standard because, yes, licensed people need to know about it because we're responsible for the location of the cylinders and the regulator, etc. But also it goes to the LPG suppliers. So this really, as an LPG supplier, this is the standard that they must work to. It gives all the requirements about cylinder locations, hazardous areas, everything up to the outlet of the first regulator. And then, of course, we've got 3814 for those who do Type B gas work in the audience. And this sometimes gets a little bit lost with Type B installers, is that, yes, there is AS 3814, but when you design a Type B appliance, you must develop what they call a technical submission, which has to comply with 3814. But when the installer comes along to install the gas device, yes, they're installing it to 3814 because that's what the technical submission should be based on, but they are actually installing it to the technical submission because the technical submission is the document that has been approved by the approval authority to say that that design meets 3814. So we do see an awful lot of Type B devices being installed without a copy of the technical submission being provided to the owner or being available on site so that things can be checked like ventilation requirements, purge rates, ignition times, things like that. Gas compliance certificate. So when you've done your work in line with the standards, you have to issue a certificate to say that the work you've done is compliant. And just recently, we went through this in about 2017, 2016, but it's just started to come up again about who can issue a gas system compliance certificate. So if you are a gas work licence holder, it's your obligation to issue a certificate for the work you do. If you work for someone, then they still have to, then it's still you that has to issue the certificate, not the company. So it is the individual, not the company, that issues the certificate. It's on completion of the installation or alteration, and if you inspect a caravan or a motorhome for resale. On the opposite side to the certificate is the gas system defect notice. So a gas system defect notice must be issued if, one, if you see a non-compliance, or two, if you have a safety concern. The difference between the two is, if it's only non-compliant, that's bad enough, but the copy of the defect notice only has to go to the owner. If there is imminent risk, so there is actually a safety concern, like a gas leak or an unflued appliance, no ventilation, soot around an appliance, something of that nature, not only do you need to issue the certificate, the defect notice, but you also have to contact the inspector and the gas supplier and tell us and them what actions you've taken to mitigate the risk. Transition to eCert. So this is a thing that we are taking. So 3 years ago, we introduced an e-certificate. How many people are using the e-certificate? That's a good average, 4. Okay. So I have some news for everybody else. We are transitioning away from hard copy books. It is inevitable that we will transition away. Currently, we have a projected timeline. We've begun consultation. We've sent out some surveys. So hopefully, if you're a gas work licence holder, you've received some communication about a survey. You may have also seen those surveys online. In July this year, we will start to limit the quantities of books that can be purchased by individuals. That's not to... That's a risk mitigation thing to stop you ending up with 20 books that you then can't use, because there will be a point in time where they're no longer a legal document. And then by 2026, we're going to actually stop hard copy certificates actually being a legal document. The reason we're moving to an eCert is twofold. One, as our initial research into this found that consumers, gas system owners, are more likely to keep an e-certificate because it's just a PDF attached to an email than they are a paper document. It's not me, but modern generation, apparently they can find e-stuff better than they can find hard stuff. It also gives us some feedback about where work is being done and what work is being done. And it means that as a risk-based regulator, because we're limited in numbers, we can focus our efforts where we need to focus them. So not only can we see certificates, but we can also see defect notices. There are also potentials for the future that information may be available online to gas system owners. So if they have lost it for some reason and they want to change supplier, they may be able to go in and get a copy, maybe not a copy of the certificate itself, but the information from the certificate. That's all about licence work. We have another issue as an inspector, as a regulator. We have this other stuff that happens that we don't have any line of sight towards. So over the past 5 years, we've had 5 commercial kitchens that have resulted in significant injuries to people, staff, young people working in restaurants and kitchens after work, where the work has been conducted by an unlicensed person. Excuse me. Now, yes, we pursue that as an offence, and yes, we prosecute that, and yes, people get fines. That doesn't stop people getting hurt. So we've indulged, I guess you'd say, a fairly significant financial investment into a gas safety awareness campaign. So you should start to see these flyers around the place. It's basically we're focusing on smaller commercial kitchens, so not large burger chains or large pizza chains, because they have a maintenance program built into their systems, but people who only own one coffee shop, a family that own a coffee shop, or the little fish and chip shop, places like that. Interestingly, no one was deliberately, the research has indicated that no one deliberately tries to break the law. The reason they do it is a necessity to get something done quickly, and when they want it done, not when someone can actually turn up and get it done. But anyway, the point is we've entered into this gas safety awareness campaign. If you see the products around, the flyers, etc., please distribute them to your existing customers, because it may spread the word and you may get more work out of it. You may also see some bus shelter with the LED signs on everything. So we're trying to promote that. To be honest, it won't be so much central Brisbane or Gold Coast CBD, but it is places on the extremities, the smaller places out to the side. As well as that gas safety awareness campaign, we do issue a number of safety alerts each year in response to incidents or in response to concerns raised. I would encourage you to log on to our website and join our little club that says you want to receive updates on this. Some of the significant incidents in the last year have been the lack of overpressure protection on LPG. The matter's now closed, but sadly we had a fatality in Townsville, and the causal factor was that the regulator to the house had no OPP on the regulator. So the gas system was overpressurised. We only know it was overpressurised above 150 kPa. We don't know what it went up to. Obviously, it could have gone up to cylinder pressure, but we know it went above 150 kPa. The owners of the house smelt gas. The husband got up and went to the kitchen. His first reaction was to touch the cooktop knobs to see if it was turned off. Unfortunately, the cooktop had one of the ignition systems where as soon as you touch the knob, it sparks. And it sparked, and the house was damaged, and the gentleman passed away later in hospital. So that is a significant event for us. So OPP is a really important thing to understand and ensure that gas systems you work on, overpressure protection is there. We've had some others, gas cooktop elbows, which is the little aluminium elbow. If anybody has any of those failing on jobs they do, we have a safety alert out about it, but I'd be very interested to hear if you have any of those elbows that have failed. There was also an unsafe purging practice at a factory unit in central Queensland. I can't go into too much detail because that matter's still under investigation, but if you are purging large installations, and when I say large installations, anything more than a domestic house, you need a written procedure and you need to know what you're doing. You should know what you're doing if you're a licensed person, but if you don't do it often, you can come unstuck. So if you're not sure, consult with someone. At the end of this, the last slide's going to have my mobile and my email address on it. So take a photograph. If you're in doubt, ring me, don't do it, and then we'll talk our way through it. We have had a hydrogen explosion. It didn't even look up. But it was MMQ, so it was a slightly different area, but it does show the risks of hydrogen, but it does show that they can be managed. And the other thing is we have transitioned to an LCC 27 cylinder connection for smaller cylinders, anything less than 10 kg. They have safety devices built in. You and I do not use adapters, and we encourage those we work for not to use adapters on those cylinders. The main problem is by using the adapter, as you're doing up one thread, you're undoing the other thread. So it's just do not use adapters. Current and future issues, gas work licence renewals. So with the e-certificates, we are also looking at gas work licence renewals and the process of that, because at the moment you just pay your money and you get your next licence. There are other regulators, such as the ESO, where you have to do some form of currency, demonstrate some form of currency through an online test or possibly attending a half-day refresher. And we are thinking about that in the future. So once the e-certificate transition is well publicised and understood, we will start another consultation process about that. But when you think about it logically, there are some of us who got their licence a long, long time ago. Oh, sorry, Bill. I was looking around the room broadly, and maybe we learned under a 1932 standard or a 2002 standard, and we haven't been refreshed on what the new standard says. Especially with moving towards hydrogen, biomethane, there may be some changes in those standards which become quite significant that people need to be aware of if they're going to carry on doing the work. So it's something we're looking at. Mobile kitchens are getting bigger and bigger. more and more complex. They used to be a pie van that came round at 10 o'clock in the morning. Now they are like the image on the screen there. It's a whole business building these things. So it is a future issue that we need to deal with. 5601 is considering an annex or a supplement to cover that. In Queensland, we have a draft guideline which will be published hopefully within the next couple of months. Tiny homes, as I mentioned before, I'm sure if you talk to builders or if you talk to plumbers, you talk to electricians, there is a huge amount of confusion about what a tiny home has to comply with. That's something we need to look at. Spray booths. We've had a lot of trouble with spray booths just recently. Can't do that. No, not stopping. Okay, I will cover off now very quickly. I apologise I've taken too long. Queensland led the way by producing a hydrogen safety code of practice. Nationally now they're trying to catch up with us and produce their own national code. It's free and it's available on our website if you're involved in any hydrogen projects or you want to get hydrogen on your authorisation. Have a read of that document. It tells you the criteria to get that. Moving forward with hydrogen, there is a standard that is, it's a technical specification for hydrogen appliances. So we are preparing for cooktops, hot water units in people's homes to be 100% hydrogen in the future. There is a technical submission, technical specification that's coming out to cover that, and qualifications and training for people to move towards a hydrogen future as licensed gas fitters. That is also on the project for this year. That's me. I'm sorry I took too long. Thank you very much for the opportunity, MPAQ, and thank you for your time this morning. Please, if you've got any questions and you think about them next week, please give me a call or send me an email. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. You didn't get the double flush. It's okay. Well done. And oh, there isn't a double flush. I just made that up. But I look forward to when you're on stage with Jared very soon. That could be interesting.